Well, good morning, folks. I hope that you all saw the programming alert that I put out last week stating that there was not going to be a show. The many technical difficulties encountered were quite frustrating. I do appreciate the followers on social media that reached out to help solve the problem or try to solve the problem, although there was not anything anybody could do about the situations I had encountered. For starters, I store almost every bit of content for this show on an external hard drive. Well, while sitting up or setting up the laptop on a desk in the hotel room I was staying at for work, the hard drive tipped over on its side and just quit working, which is really strange because I've accidentally dropped that hard drive on the floor from table level before and a few times in the past, and it kept on working. As I said, it just tipped over on its side while on the desk and quit working altogether. I use that external hard drive for everything, saving research links that I can refer to when putting together episodes for the podcast. I also save all my work related documents that are for my business on the hard drive. And most importantly, all the past videos for the show, which includes the opening segment and the break segments. So I had to put something together video wise on the fly for the last published episode. Now, I could have gotten by using that same stuff for last week's episode, but then something else happened. The charging cord for the laptop stopped working as well, which I really didn't notice until I started putting everything together for my outbrief for the client, as well as gathering stuff for last week's show. So there I was in Ardmore, Oklahoma, with my cell phone only. The laptop and the hard drive had become nothing more than paperweights. I even took the hard drive into Best Buy and talked to the Geek Squad folks. They informed me that they could recover the data, but it would be more than 3 weeks to get it back. So I left the store and planned on getting that done once I got back home to Tennessee. As far as the laptop power cord, I did have a spare one at the house, so there was no sense in trying to get one ordered and delivered to the hotel prior to my leaving the area. In the interim, I learned a few lessons, as well as purchased a much more reliable laptop. The first lesson is I'm starting to store stuff for the show on a better external laptop and backing it up to the cloud. That way I can access everything from any computer anywhere. And as I mentioned, I went out and got a new laptop. Based upon the recommendations of my daughter and several of my fellow coaches, I went with the Apple MacBook Pro. This new laptop is much more intuitive than a Windows based laptop, but is going to take a while for me to get to complete the transitions from Windows products to Apple. So, that is the short version of my 2 week update on activities. In today's episode, we're going to discuss how the Tennessee General Assembly is attempting to conceal their activities with a simply worded lie in a piece of legislation, which is the reason for the title of this week's show. I will also be updating the audience about what went down at the local school board candidate forum that happened this past Thursday at the Seymour branch of the Sevier County Public Library. Now, here's the disclaimer. The following content is approved for by Larry Linton for TN12, candidate for the GOP nomination for Tennessee House of Representatives, District 12. Larry Linton, Treasurer. With all that being said, let's get on with this week's episode of the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Again, good morning, folks, and welcome to this week's show. It seems like forever since we last spoke, even though it's only been 1 week that I missed putting an episode out there. We will be sticking strictly with Tennessee-related items in this episode. In fact, for the next few months, I will be prominently covering local and state news and information as my campaign progresses up to the primary on the 1st of August. With that being said, early voting for the local county primary elections has begun, as well as for the presidential preference primary. As a reminder to the Republican Party voters here in Sevier County, this is one of those elections that you must vote in so that you can maintain your quote unquote bona fide Republican status with the state GOP. Early voting continues through the 27th of this month, and Election Day is the 5th of March. My lovely bride and I, we will be doing our public duty that is required for citizenship in a republic by participating in our system of self-governance. We will be voting tomorrow during the early voting period. I know, early voting is a terrible system, but it is what's in place until we can change it. I could have requested an absentee ballot because I will be working out of state on the 5th of March, but I wanted to go to the early voting site arm in arm with Denise. If you live in Sevier County, please vote. I would say please vote early and often, but I'm not a Democrat. So just ensure that you vote. Speaking of the August primary, I picked up my petition to get on the ballot right after I returned home last week. I've been gathering signatures and will continue to do that up until I leave again for my next series of engagements with the client. If you see me out and about here in Sevier County, don't hesitate to give me a holler. As I mentioned, the state and federal primary, as well as the state and county general election, is August 1st. The deadline to register to vote in that election is July the 2nd. The early voting period for that election is July 12th through the 27th. The deadline for absentee voting is the 25th of July. If you fail to register to vote in time for this March primary election, please ensure you do so by July 2nd. Now, both of these primary elections serve as the buildup to the big one on November 5th. As I've always stated, the best way to overcome any possible cheating is to actually show up to the polls and vote. If more than 80% of the registered voters do show up in person in the voting booth, the amount of cheating that would have to take place would be excruciatingly obvious. Now, if you would like to donate to my campaign, head over to my webpage, libertyleadershipandlies.com, and click on the campaign home tab. That tab will provide you with my why I am running for elected office. You can also click on the Donate Now button to contribute. The limits for contributions have been raised for this election cycle, so please donate as much as you can. Now, let's get into some reports about how the Tennessee General Assembly is working to usurp the rights of the people in support of an agenda that is supported or pushed by the alphabet mafia and their allies. This piece of legislation has its roots in the time when the mentally ill female Pizza Hut went on a shooting spree early last year at the Covenant School up near Nashville. That's when this young lady killed 3 children and 3 school employees. Now, an autopsy was performed on that mentally ill young lady, and the full results have not been released, specifically as to what medications she had in her bloodstream. What the legislators are trying to hide, probably at the request of some powerful people in the pharmaceutical industry, is the fact that this mentally ill female Pizza Hut was taking some SSRIs. For those of you who are not familiar with that term, an SSRI is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. These types of drugs, SSRIs, they are a widely used type of antidepressant. They're mainly prescribed to treat depression, particularly persistent or severe cases, and are often used in a combination with a talking therapy such as cognitive behavioral therapy, such as gender dysphoria patients. There have been numerous papers and articles written about the links between SSRIs and homicidal and suicidal tendencies. It's a topic which the government and their useful idiot allies in the media never want to link to the rash of school shootings we have seen in recent years. In fact, every effort is being made to try and erase the links because, as we know, the central government wants to remove the people's ability to defend themselves by laying the blame squarely on the inanimate object that is the firearm. So anyway, last week, that bill that will keep the autopsy results of children killed at the hands of violent crime offenders from being public record, it moved to the Tennessee House State Government Committee by voice vote. This committee is led by Chairman Kelly Keesling. Committees and their voice votes again, right? Keep that in mind as we talk about the reason behind this week's show's title. Back to the bill, though. For the vote in the House State Government Committee, Chair Keesling chose to use this very popular method of being non-transparent, a voice vote, to hide the voting records of committee members from public scrutiny. Because it was moved through the committee by that voice vote, Tennesseans can safely assume that Representative Keesling supports HB 1695 and is solely responsible for its passage. Chair Keesling could have used a transparent roll call vote, but opted for a voice vote to shield committee members and himself from accountability. You know, I'm going to be digging into the political campaign contributions Representative Keesling and the rest of the committee members received. How much and from whom, you know? That is probably the reason for the votes and the lack of transparency in the way they voted. As is the norm in these voice votes in committee, it was recorded solely as the ayes prevail. Recently, Representative Jody Barrett, gave an interview on the Mill Creek View, Tennessee podcast. And he said that all a legislator has to do in order to have their voice vote recorded is give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to the clerk. This means that it is very easy for legislators to put their vote on record and create transparency with their constituents if they choose to. But we know that these House members do not do that when they don't want to be on record, especially come election season here in Tennessee. That is why, according to the General Assembly website and associated video of the state government committee meeting that day, no member requested to have their votes counted. More on this and other General Assembly shenanigans on the other side of this next break. So with that, we'll be right back. Okay, folks, we're back. We're going to stick with the topic of the previous segment for just a bit before moving on. I did take a very quick cursory glance at Chairman Concealing's latest campaign finance filings. The most recent report revealed that he has garnered more than $37,000 in donations from political action committees since this past August. So that begs the question, is this representative, a chairman of a committee, is he voting like his constituents elected him to vote and represent them? Or is he voting how those political action committees want him to vote and representing their interests in the General Assembly? Keep in mind that with voice votes in committees, the chair of that committee has the sole discretion on whether a bill advances or dies in that committee based upon what they quote unquote hear. I believe we all know the answer to that, which should not come as a big surprise to anybody that listens to this show. Our representatives no longer legislate by the consent of the governed, but by the bribes and coercion of lobbyists and corporations. These large corporations and industries, along with their lobbyists, and there are very few larger and wealthier than the pharmaceutical industry, they are the ones governing us right now. I was listening to an episode of the Tucker Carlson podcast while I was driving from Midland, Texas to Ardmore, Oklahoma last week that really captured the size and scope of this so-called big pharma problem we have. If you have a chance to listen to it, please do so. I shared that particular episode on my blog and podcast Facebook page on Friday. After listening to that episode, you can start to see the bigger picture behind how and why our government behaves the way it does right now without the citizens' involvement. Our apathy has led our government to hate us and only see us as money generators to fuel their operations. Tucker's guest for this episode, which was released on February 2nd, was a Mr. Callie Means. As I said, you should listen to that very enlightening episode, and it will serve to inform you as to why legislation, especially in the healthcare realm, is passed or killed at the state or central government level. I hope you all understand that this is probably the reason behind this piece of legislation being moved along in the Tennessee General Assembly committee process with zero transparency. If this bill ends up becoming law, it will block the results of autopsies of these mentally ill children that decide to shoot and kill other children in schools from ever seeing the light of day. These pharmaceutical companies would rather see that our God-given right of self-defense be taken away than to have the people know that it is their drugs causing these children to become homicidal maniacs. Nearly a full year has passed since that troubled young lady committed those murders, and the public still has not seen the full manifesto she left behind, nor the full autopsy report. Situations such as that and other school shootings where the killer left behind a manifesto and aligned with some subsect of the alphabet mafia should not cause anyone to wonder why anymore. We know the why, and we cannot let the pharmaceutical industry, along with their lobbyists and allied elected officials, work to erode our God-given rights with the desperate attempts to cover up the actual truth. Now, that piece of legislation, by the way, it is House Bill 1695, has been moved to the House Government Operations Committee. I cannot see when that committee is set to hear and vote on this bill, but it is something we need to be on the lookout for. This bill only compounds the severe lack of transparency our state government has fully embraced. When it does pop up in the House Government Operations Committee, you should contact the members of that committee and urge them to do a couple of things. The first thing is a roll call vote on the bill, not a voice vote. The second thing is urge them to kill the bill because it creates another layer of zero transparency in our state government. Now, this committee is comprised of Chair John Reagan and Vice Chair Jay Reedy. The members of the committee are Gino Bulso, Karen Camper, Dale Carr, Jesse Chisholm, John Ray Clemens, John Crawford, Rick Eldridge, Jeremy Faison, Youssef Hakim, Caleb Hemmer, Justin Jones, and there's another peach, Kelly Kiesling again, Asabi Doc Kumar, Justin Lafferty, William Lambert, the mini tyrant himself, Mary Littleton, Pat Marsh, Greg Martin, and Jack McCalman. You should have noticed the names of the usual suspects there that are quite comfortable usurping the liberty of Tennesseans. I would not be surprised if anyone on that list would agree to both of those actions I urge the audience to do. But now let's move on to the bit of legislation in the Tennessee General Assembly that inspired the title of this week's show. And that is the General Assembly is concealing a lie. The bill is House Bill 1652, and it was introduced by Representative Gino Bulso. I don't know why it has escaped my notice for so long, but it was brought to my attention by John Gentry. If you remember, Mr. Gentry campaigned in 2022 as an independent constitutional Republican gubernatorial candidate against our trans-Republican Governor Bill Lee. He is running right now for the state Senate seat occupied by Senator Farrell Hale of Senate District 18. Senator Hale, he is a trans-Republican of the highest order. Now, its companion bill in the Senate is Senate Bill 2225 that was introduced by Senator Adam Lowe. Now, I have not heard much about that guy, but by the looks of this bill, we can accurately conclude he is acting like a straight-up communist. This bill has been introduced to amend Tennessee Code Title 16, which is relative to the General Assembly. The bill reads as follows: Be it enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, Section 1, Tennessee Code Annotated Title 16, Chapter 1, is amended by adding the following as a new section. No circuit, chancery, or other court of this state has subject matter jurisdiction over any legal action, challenging any rule, regulation, or procedure of the Senate or House of Representatives. Section 2. This act takes effect upon becoming a law, the public welfare requiring it. That is the biggest lie of this bill, ladies and gentlemen. Just how can elected officials in the General Assembly state that the public welfare requires that they can make rules that prevent the people of this state from taking action through the judicial branch of government? This bill looks to set up the General Assembly as a tyrannical overlords, making rules as they see fit without any interference by the people that elected them, nor through the court system that serves as a check on any abuse of power. As Mr. Gentry accurately points out, Senator Lowe and Representative Bulso believe the General Assembly should be accountable to none for making unconstitutional rules, regulations, or procedures for the houses. He further points out that recently our esteemed Speaker of the House, Cameron Sexton, he instituted a new rule that the gallery overlooking the House floor is closed to spectators unless you have a ticket. Now, if I remember correctly, there are only 99 tickets available, and a citizen must get your ticket from a member of the House. Here's where that rule by Speaker Sexton runs right up against our state's constitution, where it states in Article 2, Section 22, the doors of each house and of committees of the whole shall be kept open unless when the business shall be such as ought to be kept secret. Now, I'm going to pause for a break here and pick this up in the next segment. So I'll be right back, folks. And we're back. Picking up where I left off in the last segment, Tennessee Speaker of the House, Cameron Sexton's new rule, states that the doors to the gallery of the House are closed unless you have a ticket. Those tickets are controlled by members of the House, which means that the possibility exists that only so-called approved people will be given tickets to the gallery. I'm sure that Tennessee House leadership has a list of people that are persona non grata. I may even be on that list. I'm quite sure there are many other true conservative Republicans around the state that have been critical of our supposedly Republican supermajority in the news and on social media. I bet you they're on that list as well. I'm quite used to having my name on a list, but is that how you want your General Assembly to operate? Only approved people can be granted access to the gallery? Now, with this proposed bill by Representative Bulso and Senator Lowe, how are we, the people, the lawful citizens of the state of Tennessee, how can we challenge those rules if the courts are now going to be statutorily prohibited from having jurisdiction in such a case? This new bill, if it becomes law, means that the people will not be able to challenge any rules that are contrary to the Tennessee Constitution. It's pretty convenient for a General Assembly that hates operating with any transparency, isn't it? Now, as to the big lie in this bill, how possibly does the public welfare benefit from being denied access to the courts to challenge unconstitutional rules, policies, regulations, and procedures? Ladies and gentlemen, this is how tyranny creeps into state government. This is how one branch of government attempts to remove the checks and balances the Constitution imposed upon that government. Pay close attention to this bill, folks. This piece of legislation has been placed on the State Government Committee to be heard on Friday, or excuse me, on February 21st. That's this coming Wednesday, folks. It will be held in the House Hearing Room 2 at 10:30 a.m. Central Time. You can find the committee on the General Assembly's website along with their calendar. You can also watch the committee hearing live. I encourage you to do so. That way, you can watch tyranny in action. This is the same committee that we talked about earlier this episode when we discussed the autopsy bill, the non-transparent committee, which, come to think of it, is nearly every House committee in the Tennessee General Assembly right now. Now, I want to get into some local politics, ladies and gentlemen. I know many of the listeners in Sevier County were specifically listening to this episode to catch up on last Thursday night's Sevier County Board of Education candidate forum that took place at the Seymour branch of the Sevier County Public Library. I attended the forum and submitted some questions for the moderator to ask the two candidates that decided to participate. I even live streamed the event on the podcast Facebook page. Let me tell you that for the most part, it was a non-event. The format for the event was kind of wonky because it was not very formally structured, which is why I call it a non-event for the most part. The Friends of the Seymour Library hosted this forum, and they did their best for this first ever in memory event. I'm sure they developed many lessons learned from this event that they will implement in the future for any other forums they will be hosting. All of the questions submitted to the moderator were not asked because there was not a time limit imposed on the candidates' answers. I will say that both candidates did their best in answering the questions that were asked, but some of the questions were not answerable by the candidates at the time because they lacked the access needed or were not sure of the state laws currently in place. So many of their answers were quite rambling and took up much of the allotted hour the event was scheduled for. Both of the candidates, though, did not seem to be familiar with the social emotional learning curricula that has been purchased and in place in the Sevier County Public Schools. I must tell you, that was the most disappointing part for me. If somebody is seeking election to the Board of Education here, I believe that they should really be informed about that divisive, corrosive, and sexualizing curriculum and why it is in our public schools. After all, that has been the reason behind a majority of the citizen complaints at the school board meetings that had public comments. Or some of their answers, it went off the rails and did not directly address the meat of the question that was asked. If you would like to see the video recording of the event, just search for the Liberty Leadership and Lies Facebook page. The video will be up there for at least 6 months. Now, I'd like to ask the audience a favor, though. Once you do find the page on Facebook, give it a follow. But back to the candidate forum. As a reminder, this forum was for 3 candidates seeking the District 4 school board seat. The District 2 seat candidate is running unopposed. For the District 4 seat, 2 of the 3 candidates showed up to the forum. The incumbent, Mr. Charles Temple, he declined to participate. No input, ladies and gentlemen, is an input. If you live in Sevier County School Board District 4, Mr. Temple thinks so highly of his voters that he declined to participate. That should immediately disqualify him from consideration during this election. The other two candidates, well, they did show up. We've discussed them before on this program, but now that they participate in the forum, they definitely rate some consideration. However, at the end of the forum, it sort of really went off the rails. We have discussed Mr. Ballard's removal as the president of the Sevier County Utility District before and how he refused to come on the podcast to give his side of the story. We also discussed how he refused to answer the candidate survey that was sent to all the candidates this election cycle. Of the 4 candidates, 3 for District 4 and 1 for District 2, only Mr. Charles Ogle answered the questions on the survey. Now, here's where it went sort of off the rails. When providing his reasoning as to why he did not answer their candidate survey, he stated that he didn't answer it because of his past encounters with a media outlet that would not grant him editorial access to the story written about him as it relates to the investigation into his conduct and his subsequent firing as the president of the Sevier County Utility District. Nobody is ever given editorial access to a story written about them. But then he went on to infer that leadership at Empowered Sevier, the organization that put together the candidate survey, attacked him on social media, lied about him, and would lie and edit any answers that he would provide in the candidate survey. Oh, don't forget, he refused to come on this show as well when I found out he was running, and before I heard anything about the issues with his prior stint with Scud. Needless to say, he was not completely truthful in his recounting of his email correspondence with Kelly O'Connor from Empowered Sevier. Kelly went on to address that accusation on the group's Facebook page in a very, very professional manner. Now, as I stated, if you want to watch the video of that forum, it's on the podcast Facebook page, and Kelly O'Connor's response is on the Empowered Sevier Facebook page. Please go check them both out. I'm going to pause right here and come back for the closing of the show with God's Word, as well as a wrap up on the forum. So I'll be right back. And we're back with a closing segment, folks. Once again, please watch the entire video of the candidate forum on the Facebook page because, like I said, the forum went off the rails completely at the end. That is when Mr. Ballard gave his side of the story and why he was fired as the president of the Sevier County Utility District. Let me tell you, his side of the story was long, detailed, and contained some serious allegations. It was not entirely unbelievable either because using a navigation term that was stuck with me since my time on active duty, the story he told checks with chart as it implies a bunch of the good old boy network type of stuff that happens here in Sevier County politics. Mr. Ballard spoke about the interactions with members that are like political appointees to the board that included the wife of the Sevier County mayor, along with the wife of a former member of the House of Representatives that represented the 12th district here in the past. Of course, there were allegations of disgruntled former employees and Nashville lobbyists all involved in his being fired. It's all there on the video, so please watch it. I was fascinated by his explanation, though. As soon as I returned home from the forum and rewatched the video, I sent Mr. Ballard another email invitation to provide his side of the story to the listeners of the podcast. Well, he politely declined, also stating that he will no longer talk about what happened at Scud. Now it gets even stranger, folks, because people have been reaching out to me on the Facebook page telling me that Mr. Ballard's recounting of the events that led to his termination are at best misleading, at worst outright lies. We won't know the truth until the Tennessee Comptroller releases the results of its investigation, and goodness knows how long that will take. On the other hand, though, I found Mr. Ogle to be much more affable and understanding of the problems that face Sevier County schools. I do not reside in School Board District 4, so I cannot vote for any of the candidates. If any of you listeners do, though, watch the video before you cast your vote so you can make a much better, more informed decision in choosing who will represent the Seymour area on the Board of Education. Well, folks, that's it and all I have for this week. We will close this week's show with wisdom from God's Word, and it comes to us from Proverbs 19:9. A false witness will not go unpunished, and whoever pours out lies will perish. Time will tell who gave false witness at the school board candidate forum. In my mind, the choice is only between the two candidates that showed up because the incumbent's refusal to even participate in the forum disqualifies them. Now, however, the Tennessee General Assembly, in their trying to pass legislation that only shields them from transparency and ultimately creates an untouchable oligarchy that seeks to rule us and not govern us, they have provided false witness to the people of Tennessee. They are pouring out lies to the people they are supposed to represent. My fellow Tennesseans, we need to shake off the apathy that has gripped our state and allowed our General Assembly to act in this manner. We can change course and we can do it in this election year. You can do that by selecting somebody, such as myself, that will go to the General Assembly and help to enforce transparency. Now, I humbly pray and ask that you stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.